It's 4:37 a.m., October 28, 2025. The Caribbean Sea is dead silent. Then two blips appear on radar, moving at 540 knots straight toward a U.S. destroyer. Within seconds, they fire missiles. But what the Venezuelan pilots didn't know was that they had just signed their own death warrant. Nautical miles southeast of Curaçao, Caribbean Sea, the USS Jason Dunham DDG-109, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, moved steadily through international waters. This wasn't just any patrol route. This corridor carried 4.8 million barrels of crude oil per day between the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, one of the most vital energy arteries on Earth. For the ship's 317 sailors, it was supposed to be routine. Nothing more than watching screens, logging positions, maintaining readiness. The kind of shift where nothing happens. Where boredom is the biggest threat. Inside the Combat Information Center, the AN/SPY-1A radar swept the horizon every 6 seconds. A rotating beam of electromagnetic energy scanning for threats up to 200 nautical miles away. The system could track over 100 targets simultaneously, from sea-skimming missiles to high-altitude bombers. But at 4:37 a.m., something changed. A faint return appeared on the screen. Weak, fragmented, low altitude. The radar operator leaned forward, adjusting filters, narrowing the beam. It wasn't noise. It wasn't a glitch. It was a signal, and it was approaching fast from the north. The shape became clearer with each sweep. 2 contacts, fighter-sized. The radar cross-section matched perfectly. F-16 Fighting Falcons, Block 15 variants, relics from the 1980s, part of Venezuela's aging air force. Only 16 of these jets remained operational, and maintenance records suggested half were grounded at any given time. But these 2 were armed. And they were closing in fast approach. Altitude 4,000 feet. Range 35 miles, came the report from the Combat Information Center. The voice was steady, professional, but the tension underneath was unmistakable. On the bridge, the officer of the deck immediately sent a radio hail on all frequencies. Standard protocol. Identify yourself. State your intentions. Acknowledge this transmission. Silence. The F-16s didn't respond. Instead, they accelerated to 540 knots, flying directly toward the destroyer. Their flight path was unmistakable. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. The captain's voice cut through the growing tension. Condition 2, weapons ready. Battle stations manned. Throughout the ship, alarms sounded. Sailors sprinted to their positions. Hatches sealed with metallic thuds. In the Combat Information Center, fingers swept across firing protocols, checking missile inventories, confirming radar locks. Below deck, the Phalanx CIWS close-in weapon system rotated to life, its 6-barreled Gatling gun tracking the incoming threats. The destroyer's Mk-41 vertical launch system held 96 cells. Each cell could fire SM-2 standard missiles, SM-6 interceptors, or Tomahawk cruise missiles. The ship was a floating arsenal designed to survive and respond to threats from the air, surface, and subsurface simultaneously. But rules of engagement still applied. The Jason Dunham couldn't fire first, not without confirmation of hostile intent. Not without a clear threat to American lives, the F-16s continued their approach. 30 miles, 25 miles, 20 miles. They were now well within visual range, though the pre-dawn darkness made identification difficult. Radar painted their every move. The Aegis Combat System calculated intercept solutions every 0.8 seconds, updating trajectories, predicting engagement windows. On deck, sailors locked into position. The tension was unbearable. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Everyone hoped they were wrong. To attack a U.S. warship in international waters wasn't an act of defiance. It was an act of suicide. What Venezuela didn't know, what it was about to learn the hard way, was that the Jason Dunham wasn't just a ship. It was a floating fortress, armed with technology decades beyond anything the Venezuelan Air Force possessed. This wasn't a flyby. It was a challenge to the United States Navy, and the Navy doesn't lose challenges. 4:49 a.m., 18 nautical miles from USS Jason Dunham. The tension reached its breaking point. Radar operators tracked the 2 F-16 Block 15s as they suddenly split formation, a classic Cold War tactic still taught in air combat schools across the world. One jet dove to 1,200 feet above sea level. The other climbed to 8,000 feet, a pincer attack. Outdated, yes, but still dangerous if left unanswered. Target separation confirmed. Petty Officer Lang reported, his voice tight. "Maintain lock," the combat director replied. His tone ice cold. At 4:50 a.m., the lead Venezuelan pilot fired first. 2 AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles streaked off the rails. Vintage heat-seeking missiles designed in 1983, now hurtling toward the destroyer at over 1,500 miles per hour. Each missile cost around $56,000, cheap by modern standards. But in the wrong hands, they could still spark a billion-dollar crisis. The Aegis Combat System aboard the Jason Dunham reacted before the crew could even blink. 0.8 seconds after launch detection, tracking beams tightened. Within 4 seconds, RIM 162 ESSM cells were hot, ready to fire. By the 5th second, the 6-barreled Phalanx CIWS Block 1B roared to life. 500 rounds per minute. A curtain of tungsten that could shred incoming missiles, aircraft, even small boats. The sound was deafening, a mechanical scream that drowned out everything else, but the missiles never reached the ship. The AIM-9L Sidewinders veered off course within seconds, carving chaotic arcs across the sea before slamming harmlessly into the water. 2 pillars of spray erupted, then collapsed back into the waves. The first F-16 broke hard right to evade, its radar warning receiver screaming in the cockpit. The pilot rolled, nearly skimming the edge of the Phalanx engagement envelope. A streak of tracer fire marked a lethal line at 30,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The second jet banked left, preparing for a gun run. Its nose dropped. The M61 Vulcan 20mm cannon began to spin, building up speed. But the AN-SPY-1 radar on the Dunham had already locked onto the jet down to the inch. The fire control system adjusted elevation, predicting the exact moment it would cross the engagement line. The destroyer still did not fire. Rules of engagement still bound the captain's hand. The Americans recorded every move, every mistake, every hostile breath. The data would be used later, in briefings, in diplomatic cables, in courtrooms if necessary. On the bridge, the captain's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "They fired once, hit water twice. They'll get no third chance." And below deck, in that bone-cold moment of precision, the crew knew the next order would not be defend, it would be eliminate. But here's what no one aboard the Jason Dunham knew yet. Back in Caracas, inside the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense, a general watched the live feed from the F-16s with growing dread. He hadn't authorized this strike, neither had the president. These 2 pilots, both hardliners with ties to the old regime, had taken off without clearance. This wasn't a military operation. It was a rogue attack, a desperate attempt by 2 men who believed they could provoke the United States into a conflict that would unite their fractured nation. They thought firing on an American warship would make them heroes. Martyrs for the cause. They were wrong. Intelligence intercepts captured in real time by U.S. signals, intelligence aircraft orbiting nearby confirmed the truth. The Venezuelan Air Force had no idea this attack was happening until it was already underway. By the time orders were sent to abort, the missiles had already been fired. The 2 pilots had gambled everything on one belief, that Venezuela's proximity to vital oil routes would force the United States to hesitate, to negotiate, to back down, but they had miscalculated entirely. The United States Navy doesn't hesitate. It responds, and what happened next wasn't just a counterattack. It was a demonstration of the gap between ambition and capability. Between defiance and dominance, the reason the AIM-9L Sidewinders failed was simple physics. Heat-seeking missiles like the Sidewinder are designed to lock onto jet exhaust. The infrared signature of burning fuel at 1,200 degrees Celsius. Fighter jets, bombers, helicopters all produce massive heat signatures that these missiles can track from miles away. But the USS Jason Dunham wasn't a jet. It was a warship powered by 4 General Electric LM2500 gas turbines cooled by seawater. The exhaust was dispersed through vents near the waterline, where ocean spray and airflow kept temperatures low. There was no concentrated heat source for the missiles to lock onto. The moment the Sidewinders lost their infrared lock, they defaulted to ballistic flight. No guidance, no correction. Just 2 unguided projectiles falling into the ocean. The Venezuelan pilots had launched weapons designed for air-to-air combat against a surface target, a fundamental error that revealed just how outdated their training and tactics really were, but the Jason Dunham's response would reveal something far more important. The sheer technological superiority of American naval warfare, the kind of advantage that turns battles into executions. 5 a.m., Northern Caribbean airspace, altitude 8,000 feet. The silence shattered like glass. From the Combat Information Center, a transmission came through the encrypted line. 3 words: sharp and final, weapons free. Engage hostiles. In that instant, the USS Jason Dunham ceased to be a ship. It became vengeance in motion. The Mk-41 vertical launch system roared open with metallic thunder, unleashing 4 RIM 174 Standard Missile 6 interceptors. Each missile worth $4.3 million, each climbing at Mach 3.5, slicing through the Caribbean haze like molten spears. Overhead, the Fleet Air Arm commander ordered 2 F-18E Super Hornets into the fight. They had been loitering at 30,000 feet, monitoring the situation, weapons hot, waiting for clearance. Now they dove, afterburners igniting, accelerating to combat speed. At 8,000 feet, the Venezuelan pilots saw the vapor trails too late. Their radar warning receivers exploded with alerts. Solid red, multiple locks. Missile launch detected. Threat imminent. The cockpits flooded with chaos. Alarms screaming. Lights flashing. Systems overloading. They yanked hard on the sticks, desperate to climb, to turn, to evade. But physics had already taken sides. The first SM-6 struck at 900 meters. A blossom of tungsten fragments burning hotter than 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The explosion ripped through the F-16's right wing, severing hydraulic lines, control surfaces, fuel lines. The jet spun violently, rolling into a death spiral, trailing black smoke across the dawn sky. Inside, the pilot clawed for the Aegis II ejection handle. His fingers found the ring. He pulled hard. Nothing happened. The ejection system, 11 years overdue for maintenance, failed to fire. The explosive bolts never detonated. The canopy never separated. His final breath was a scream that vanished beneath the static. The second F-16 tried to fight back. Its ALQ-131 jamming pod, a Cold War antique designed in 1978, spat out false signals, trying to blind the destroyer's radar. Electronic noise flooded the spectrum, but the Jason Dunham's AN/SLQ-32V BA-6 electronic warfare suite countered with surgical precision. It identified the jamming frequency, calculated the source, and fed mirrored echoes straight back into the jet's systems. In seconds, the cockpit lights flickered, then died. Power surge! System crash! Total failure. The pilot's hands flew across the panels, trying to reboot, trying to restore anything. But it was too late. Target 2 losing altitude, a sailor reported, his voice calm. Detached. Confirm splash, the captain replied. At 4:56 a.m., both radar blips vanished. 2 aircraft. 2 pilots. 60 million in metal and fuel. Erased in less than 60 seconds. The ocean swallowed the wreckage, leaving behind only streaks of burning oil on the waves. On the bridge of the Jason Dunham, the phalanx guns powered down. The air still reeked of cordite and salt. No one spoke. No one cheered. No one celebrated. There was no triumph here. Only the grim understanding of what had just occurred. Venezuela had thrown 2 relics at a superpower. The United States had replied with a verdict written in supersonic fire. The Combat Information Center logged the engagement. Timestamps, missile expenditures, radar tracks. Everything documented with clinical precision. This wasn't personal. It was procedural. The sailors returned to their stations. The watch continued. The patrol resumed, but something had changed. The Caribbean Sea, once calm and routine, now carried a different weight. The kind of silence that follows violence. The kind of quiet that only comes after judgment. Above, the F-18E Super Hornets circled once, confirming the kills, then banked north toward Roosevelt Roads Naval Base in Puerto Rico. Their mission complete. The sea fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The kind that follows judgment. And in that moment, every nation with a coastline, every military with ambitions, every leader with grievances understood one simple truth. The United States Navy does not bluff. AM. Caracas and Washington, D.C. By sunrise, the battle was over, but the aftershocks had only just begun. At 6 a.m., Venezuela's state media shattered the silence with a statement that rippled across Latin America. The United States has violated Venezuelan airspace and destroyed 2 of our fighter jets in an unprovoked act of aggression. Within minutes, President Nicolas Maduro appeared on national television, raising his fist, denouncing the clash as imperial aggression. Caracas filed an emergency appeal to the United Nations Security Council, demanding condemnation and reparations. But 2,000 miles north, the Pentagon was already prepared. At 6:31 a.m., the Department of Defense released radar logs, encrypted radio recordings, and thermal imagery captured by the AN/SPY-1A system aboard the USS Jason Dunham. The evidence was undeniable. Venezuelan jets had crossed 12.4 nautical miles into international airspace. They had fired 2 AIM-9L missiles first. The U.S. destroyer had retaliated only after detecting those launches and confirming hostile intent. Every frame, every signal, every timestamp documented. The data hit global media like an explosion. In Washington, senior officials briefed Congress. Their tone was cold and final. This was not an escalation. This was a response to an unprovoked attack on United States Navy personnel operating in international waters. The U.S. Navy immediately reinforced the region. USS Gravely DDG-107 and USS Porter DDG-78 departed Norfolk within 4 hours. The carrier USS George H.W. Bush CVN-77 redirected its FA-18E Super Hornet squadrons to patrol the Caribbean air corridor. Satellite coverage expanded. 3 RQ-4 Global Hawk drones and 1 P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft were deployed for round-the-clock surveillance. The message was unmistakable. The United States was preparing for escalation, but on its own terms. Meanwhile, global markets reacted instantly. Crude oil prices surged 7.8% overnight. Maritime insurers tripled premiums for vessels transiting the Caribbean corridor. Analysts called it the most dangerous standoff in the Western Hemisphere since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Inside the Situation Room, a U.S. admiral summed it up in one sentence. That wasn't an air battle. That was annihilation. And as the world watched 2 nations inch toward confrontation, the balance of power in the Caribbean shifted quietly, decisively, toward the side that still stood unbroken. AM. Roosevelt Roads Naval Base. Puerto Rico. Dawn broke over the Caribbean, but the sky carried a different hue. Cold, metallic, disciplined. On the runway at Roosevelt Roads, 10 F-35C Lightning II fighter jets stood in perfect formation, their canopies gleaming under the first light of day. Each aircraft represented $94 million worth of precision and deterrence. Their mission wasn't to fight. It was to be seen. At 8:05 a.m., one by one, they took off. The thunder of their afterburners rolled across the bay like steel lightning echoing through the sky. Their flight path traced the edge of Venezuelan airspace, a silent warning. A line drawn through the morning mist. At 25,000 feet, their radar signatures painted a message across every defense network in the region. The United States was watching and waiting. Back in Washington, the Department of Defense issued an official statement, read aloud by the Secretary himself. Any hostile action against U.S. forces will be met with an immediate, overwhelming, and decisive response. It wasn't a threat. It was a law of physics. By noon, USS Gravely and USS Porter had joined USS Jason Dunham. Together, the 3 destroyers formed a 7,500-ton wall of steel, sweeping radar every 6 seconds, maintaining a defensive perimeter of over 40 nautical miles. Above them, 3 E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft orbited in a perfect triangle. Their radar capable of tracking 2,000 targets simultaneously. No one dared to cross that line again. The international reaction was swift. European allies voiced full support for Washington's stance. OPEC ministers convened emergency meetings amid fears of disruption to $180 billion worth of annual oil shipping routes. In Caracas, silence replaced outrage. Venezuelan air bases went dark. The country's remaining 14 operational F-16s were grounded indefinitely. As night fell, the Caribbean grew calm again. Not with peace, but with order. Waves lapped gently against the hulls of the U.S. destroyers, as if the sea itself acknowledged their authority. There were no victory parades, no speeches, only a quiet reaffirmation of dominance. America does not start wars, the final line of the Pentagon brief read, but America always ends them. And when the sun rose over the Atlantic, the reflection on those gray hulls told the world everything it needed to know. Deterrence, when forged in discipline, carries more power than any missile ever could. The Caribbean returned to stillness, the kind of quiet that only follows violence. But beneath the calm waves, the consequences rippled far beyond sight. decisive. Less than 24 hours, a brief confrontation had rewritten the balance of power across the Western Hemisphere. 2 aircraft lost, $60 million in wreckage. One wounded nation forced to face its own limits. Yet the true cost wasn't measured in metal, but in credibility. For Venezuela, the clash became a cautionary tale, a moment when pride collided headfirst with reality. It had gambled on defiance, believing that proximity could substitute for power. It learned instead that distance means nothing to precision, that in modern warfare, arrogance burns faster than fuel. For the United States, it was never about conquest. The Jason Dunham had not sought glory, only to hold the line. The sailors who stood at their stations that morning didn't cheer when the threat fell. They simply logged the time, sealed the report, and prepared for the next watch. Their discipline was the difference between chaos and order, between a skirmish and a war. By week's end, the headlines had shifted elsewhere. The world moved on, but in military circles, the engagement became a textbook example of escalation control. How one destroyer, with restraint and precision, stopped a regional crisis before it began. And so the ocean kept its secrets. But one truth lingered above the waterline. Power is not proven by who strikes first, but by who stands unshaken after the smoke clears. The lesson was simple and eternal. The sea remembers, and so does America. Subscribe to see what happens when the next conflict erupts.